remember when I was here about 90 days ago, and I told you he's going to walk these back. Right? The tariffs that he announced on Liberation Day would have crushed the American economy. They would have been bad for consumers, ultimately bad for Trump's political standing, wildly unpopular around the Hill, and that we should expect him to walk it back. And we have seen a steady walk back of those, to the point where he started getting embarrassed, right? The so-called taco trade, Trump's always caves. And he said enough. August 1st is going to be the day when all these tariffs are going into. But it also, I think, helped him with his negotiating power to go to countries and say, look, you have until August 1 to cut a deal, really lit a fire under the trade negotiators. He has announced all sorts of trade deals now, which is mostly just us raising tariffs, not as much as he originally said, but still raising tariffs on some of our biggest trading partners. The devil will be in the detail on those, right? We have yet to see the fine print on any of those deals. And I think the market, companies are eager, importers. Yeah. I think if I'm a customs agent, I want to see the details right now. So I think it'll be interesting to see the details of those, which they'll have to produce very quickly. And it'll also be interesting to see if these hold, or if we see more walkbacks in the future with some of our big trading partners. The tariffs that he's talking about on Canada, that's really going to hurt the U.S. economy. I mean, the U.S. economy is deeply intertwined with Mexico and the Canadian economy. This is why he's done the delay for the Mexico one. And it'll be interesting to see if the Canada one actually holds.
Well, it sounds like you see the jury as still being out. We thought we'd have a deal with India. That was one of the first countries that came up. Didn't happen. Yep. You wonder if these threats result in one, because they've said, well, this is a deadline on August 1st. Anybody can call the president, make a deal anytime they want. So how much of this will continue to roll into the fall?
Yeah, well, and I think one of the issues is that we talked about this 90 days ago, and I think it remains true that the administration still has not laid out a clear rationale for why we are embarking on all these new tariffs around the world, right? Some of it is, look, we need to crack down on China, and we need to really raise tariffs on China. China actually is getting let off relatively easy so far. And you have a lot of companies who are in China who are looking at, well, India would be a good place to move move that manufacturing. And now the tariffs in India are even worse. So I think there's a disconnect with, is this about China? Is this about raising revenue? Because sure, it's raising some revenue, but not nearly as much as they promised. And at the same time, you're seeing it starting to really drag on GDP, which ultimately is also going to impact tax receipts. Or is this about reshoring American jobs? Because we haven't seen any evidence of that yet either. So, I think the administration does have some challenges here. Ultimately, this is driven by what Trump believes, which is that tariffs are good. It's the one thing he's been consistent on for his entire adult life, that he wants more tariffs. And we're going to, and that's what we're finally seeing. And I think the economic impact, once they are actually in place, it'll be real.
What do you make of the messaging that's coming out of this White House that it's not inflationary, tariffs are maybe a one-time adjustment? When we hear from the likes of Procter & Gamble this week, we're hiking prices on a quarter of our goods. You're a political practitioner. At some point, this makes its way to the consumer, to the voter, that may not be consumed or even interested in any of this talk of tariffs or what these deals include. At some point, though, it lands on the kitchen table, and that's where the political operatives come in.
I mean, look, as Joe Biden found out the hard way, inflation is the #1 killer of a presidency. And tariffs are inflationary, full stop. I mean, tariffs literally are raising the prices of imported goods. And you can make them in the U.S., but they're going to be more expensive in the U.S. And for the consumer, that means ultimately they're going to be paying more for many of the goods and services. Look, if you like avocados and these tariffs going into effect in Mexico, the price of avocados are going up. The price of guacamoles are going up. And so the consumers will ultimately see that, and they will hold the White House accountable. Look, if inflation is not going up, that's because demand's going down, and that's what we saw in the inflation numbers that came out this morning, where inflation was up, but not as much as we feared, in part because demand is falling. So, look, either consumers are buying less, which is not great for the economy or for consumers, or inflation's going to go up. Either is a political loser for Trump in the long run. Now, look, there's going to be a lag. And the last time I was here 90 days ago, I was like, look, Trump is really threatening Christmas. Well, a lot of this stuff that people are going to be buying for Christmas has already been imported. So, a lot of this won't show up until 2026. Sure. Unfortunately for Trump and the Republicans, there happens to be a pretty big election in 2026.
Well, that's very true. The timeline here could be very difficult for Republicans. Knowing, of course, that you can't have a taco without avocado. You mentioned guacamole. You reach for this Alex Conant. on what producer James reminds us is National Avocado Day. How does this happen? July 31st, the avocado, as I read, is a food without rival among the fruits, the veritable fruit of paradise. That could come back to bite Donald Trump.
I was born in 1980. When I grew up, we did not have avocados. When I was a teenager, I had never had guacamole. Now I'm from Minnesota, so we don't have a whole lot of Mexican food in Minnesota. But I swear that this is the fact that Americans enjoy avocados in the vast quantities that we do is because of NAFTA.
How about that?
It's because of NAFTA, and Americans aren't going to stop buying avocados, but they might start paying a lot more for them. And you know what? They're not going to like that.
That's wild. And boy, isn't that the truth? I never saw a taco when I was a kid growing up in northeastern Connecticut. I wouldn't even know what that was.
Right.
A bagel was exotic. So bring this down to the congressional level, because you've got lawmakers who are on recess right now, and they've got to carry all this water. Uncertainty about tariffs. Maybe there's some support for tariffs if you're talking to steel workers. It depends on what your district is. But, particularly these states along the Canadian border, this is a real issue. People are talking about it all the time.
Yeah.
You add Jeffrey Epstein. You add some of the other issues that have been coming out of Washington lately. What do you tell a Republican lawmaker trying to have a town hall?
Well, look, first off, it's not all doom and gloom out there. The president has had, I would argue, a wildly successful opening to first 6 months of his presidency. You look at his successes in the Mideast vis-a-vis Iran. You look at the tax bill that they just passed. Some of the regulatory efforts that he's got, which I think are very popular. I think the tax bill, I know Democrats are very excited about it because it polls poorly, but I think once Americans start recognizing some of the benefits from it, look, no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security. Those are going to be election winners. And a lot of the stuff that has dominated the headlines, the cuts in health care that I think will ultimately not be popular, a lot of that doesn't come into effect for quite a while. Most of it not until after the 2026 midterm. So if I'm a congressional Republican, I'm back right now, I'm pointing at, look, GDP is high. It's growing. We're at the GDP growth is fine. Inflation is low. Unemployment is low. The world seems safer now than it seemed 9 months ago. That is all.
So you can craft an elevator pitch. That's
and by the way, you don't have to pay tax on your tips this year. This is all pretty good stuff. So I think the Republicans are in good shape right as we sit right now. I do think that tariffs add a lot of uncertainty into the economy, and how the economy looks a year from now. It's going to be different than it is now, and there are clearly some headwinds if you look at the data.
We've got about a minute left. Are you running odds for a shutdown?
Yeah, it doesn't look good. I mean, look, here's the issue. You need Democrats
they're out.
Yeah, you need Democrats to keep the government open, and the Democrats have, their base really wants them to fight. Their base was furious when they did the CR earlier this year to keep the lights on.
Rescissions was the real sin, though, right?
Yeah, they don't like I think they don't like the rescissions. It was $9 billion. I think the larger issue is that they are feeling immense amounts of pressure from their base to not cooperate with Republicans at all. So I do think it's going to be a challenge. There's going to be a big fight this fall.